Yes, this is
Let's Talk.
Let's Talk call-in radio, where we try to get to the root of problems, of issues of the day.
Radical radio.
Radical radio.
So, what is the topic for today, Mr. Raffel?
Well, the topic today...
I can read out the little thing.
New economics. New economics meaning making a change from the neoliberal corporate model that is in force today. It was all spurred by a new Oxfam study that just came out this year.
And Oxfam is the UN organization focused on hunger, yes?
Is it UN?
Or is it British?
Ox. Yeah, it's British.
Okay.
Oxford Prevention and the organization. Anyway, they
focus on poverty and hunger.
It's a study. Yeah, it's all about it was formed because of things like Biafra, when everyone was starving children in Biafra. So that it began then, as far as I can remember.
This was a civil war in Nigeria in the 1960s. For anyone, everyone.
When I was just a little fella.
Were you a part of the Blue Peter appeal for food parcels for Biafra?
I probably saw it.
He didn't send it again. How do you like that?
How's the weather where you are?
Indifference to the Biafran genocide. That's what I think when I see
Blue
Paul
Peter. Anyway, and it was about income inequality. It's now so lopsided that 8 men now own the same amount of wealth as the poorest half of the world.
Isn't that something?
And 6 of them are Americans, of course, mostly in the tech biz. All the usual suspects there. I think Carlos Slim is another one, and then there's
Zara.
a Spanish.
Yeah,
Spanish
it's the fellow Zara.com, very popular, I'm told. If you want to go buy clothing.
And the world's 10 biggest corporations together have revenue greater than the 180 poorest countries combined.
Wow. Wowzers, trousers.
So, we're back to sort of discussing some of the reasons behind the rise of populism, the election of someone like Trump, and how Marine Le Pen was able to get within a hair's breadth maybe of being in power in France, is this thing that people are feeling disempowered. People don't feel like they have any say in government, and certainly are suffering from the economics that are currently going on, which is basically making money for all these rich folks and corporations as the middle class is suffering, as lending is almost unavailable for small businesses anymore, and because they're all concentrated on more. It's more about land. That was another article that spurred this, was that the biggest money makers now are just property.
Well, it's an interesting point where it used to, the quote unquote productive parts of the economy have given way to what's called the FIRE sector, finance. Finance, what is the I? Goodness, help me out here. And real estate.
Investment?
Finance, yeah, it could be. No, what is the I? Anyway, so it was a long drive down from Marshall. But so for the people who own shares, the people who bought property, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, it looks really good for them. I know a lot of people in Marshall who say, hey, the 80s were great. What are you talking about? And now with the houses and things they were able to buy back then, it looks like they've got quite a bit of wealth. But the other parts of the economy have not done so well. So anybody who is involved in earning an income by manufacturing something, or what have you, they've been doing pretty poorly over the last 45 years. So.
And stagnation of wages for especially for unskilled workers. I mean,
Yeah, well, no, to give an example, I have a neighbor. They bought a house 30 years ago, a little more than 30 years ago now, in the Bay Area for $150,000. Today, it's worth $2.5 million, but the wages for the particular fields that they're in have not gone up in those 30 years, I mean, adjusted for inflation. Right. So when you talk about despair, I mean, a lot of the despair in the economy is we all have this ideal about what our life should look like. We should have a house. Maybe we should have two houses. We should be able to privately educate our children. We should be able to take vacations all the time, things like that. Mm-hmm. And those things are retreating further and further from what people feel is possible. So, yeah, it makes people feel as though there isn't really much hope that they're going to have the kind of life that their parents, maybe their grandparents had.
Oh, yeah. Well, wasn't there a statistic? This is the first time since the Second World War that the children are going to have aren't going to make as much money or as much wealth.
I was a school teacher for a year, and I told my students that this is almost 10 years ago now, and they were really genuinely upset because the deal in American life, really in earnest after the Second World War and the Cold War was, you're not really going to have a dynamic life. You're not really going to be able to affect politics or change the world or do any of that stuff. And you've got to butt out because there are certain concentrations of power in the United States, including the government itself, that are going to run the show and have to run the show because if not, there'll be nuclear Armageddon or the communists will take over or whatever. So you stay out of politics, but you get this deal, which is as many jet skis as you want, right? And so as that deal is breaking down, it's developed into a crisis. When it started in earnest, say from 1970 on, with the deindustrialization of the United States, in a very kind of predictable way, it affected minorities first. So, say in my hometown of Flint, Michigan, African Americans would be the last people who were hired and the first ones that would be fired. And so, and basically white America was fine with that. They're also fine with, holding down the price of food and services by having those jobs be performed by poorly paid immigrant labor from, in many cases, Mexico and Central America. Yeah. They're okay with that deal, too. So when it started to affect lots and lots of white people, and especially when it started to creep into the class of people that, generally speaking, I come from, which is people, we went to college and we're supposed to get all this stuff. Where's the stuff? Then it became a crisis. Well, back in the 70s and 80s, when it was like black people and some poor white people, okay, that's fine. Yeah. And I think underlying this, and by the way, you're listening to Let's Talk, and do call 663-8492, it's the logic of a competitive society, which says that the people who have, those 8 people that own as much as half the world, they have what they have because they deserve it. And the people that don't have anything, they it is because of their moral failings. It's because they're bad.
Well, and the devaluation of labor, of meaningful work. You don't have to enjoy your job anymore. The only reason to work is to accrue wealth, and there's this whole class of people now making money from making money, right? I mean, they're just making money trading. I mean, stock trading. Come on, how is that useful to anyone except
trading money for money's sake, right? Yeah, that's
moving money around. Currency trades. Yeah. What does that do for anybody? It doesn't do anything for anybody. Yeah. Meanwhile, people are, losing jobs. There are more people in the world, more automated jobs taking jobs away, and that's going to multiply quickly. So there are several ideas. E.F. Schumacher was saying, "The Small is Beautiful Man."
A book much owned and little read in West Moran. Well, we'll get to that in a moment. But what were you going to say about E.F. Schumacher?
He was the Schumacher Center, which is, I guess, is actually in the States, and because I went to I visited the school in England, Devon, in the UK,
which is still there.
It's still there, yeah. The Schumacher Center for New Economics, formerly the Schumacher Society, promotes New ideas. It's sort of a think tank. And you sent me that thing about think tanks, which was a real eye opener. The right wing started think tanks and pirate radio. And
that is great. We should just point out, if you go to Adam Curtis's blog on the BBC's website, search for Adam Curtis Anthony Fisher, Fisher, you will get a story. I believe I will find the quote.
It's fascinating.
But go on, please.
So Schumacher's this foundation that has been formed in his name. Local currencies. They're promoting the idea of local currencies. There's somewhere up in the Berkshires has a local currency that's been very successful, and of course Richard Kirschman has
almost ran him over today. Yes. No, I'm serious. It was down to one lane on Mesa. He got out of the way in time. I did accelerate, and it's not really fair. He's a cane.
He tried to get the West Marin dollar going here, and it's still going, and a great idea, good way to raise money for local businesses and local non-profits. So local currencies. Berkshires, it quotes about the Berkshires here in Massachusetts, 800,000 Berkshires in circulation. So these are used in the local economy with local retailers and farmers, and it's quoted as being a great socio-economic experiment, which is great. Microcredit, micro-lending, something else they promote, and community land trusts, which we have here.
Yes, we do.
Where the idea usually is that the trust buys the land, and then people can buy houses at whatever structures are there and build things if they can, if they're allowed to do it. But the land remains in common in the local commons, which is.
Sure, I mean,
wonderful. It's a great idea, and somehow Clam, the wonderful Clam next door here,
wonderful Clam,
is has been able to actually have some success here, which is great. I mean,
sure. Yeah, it's quite a task. I mean, my own work, what you'd look at is what do people need to survive, right? How do people live, and then how can you find different ways to provide them that are those needs that focus on individual and community ownership of the assets that people actually need to survive, and that's tough. I mean, it's a tough thing to do, but in a way, it helps to focus your mind on what the problem is. Because they've been doing community plans forever. Steve Costa did a community plan for Oakland back in the 90s. Donna Claveau did lots and lots of work on different kinds of planning on these sort of questions as well, that flowed from her work at the Fairlawns Institute, which is fair to say was very much influenced by Schumacher. They talked about appropriate technology, and Sim Vanderen had his office of appropriate technology in the Capitol back when he was working for the state government. Right. So there were a lot of ideas about it, a lot of them good, some of them not so good. But a lot of them just sit there on the shelf. Things that we could do today that would create a more equitable society, but that isn't the main focus. Again, as I say, it's a competitive society, and increasingly it's one in which the marketplace is the only thing that can validate the truth. So why didn't those things happen 30 and 40 years ago? People like Donna Claveau and Sim Vanderen and others were working on. Well, they must have failed because the market rejected them. They must have failed because they had to fail. And why do we have the world that we have now? Well, it's the world that's been
the free market.
It's been validated by the market. The market says this is the right way. And what the end result of that is that you live in an extremely undynamic and frozen society, and only things that have happened before can yet happen again.
And do call, please. Let's call in support of any ideas you have.
Changing the economy.
Changing the economy to one certainly more localized governance, less localized, less centralized in on the other side of the country where the swamp is. You know that swamp. 663-8492, 415-663-8492, or 8317.
And we have Twitter.
And I have the tweet box right here, so what is it?
At Let's Talk on KWMR. At Let's Talk on KWMR. If you tweet.
And so there's a little article here. David Suzuki Foundation. Talking about shorter working hours. It was envisioned. Apparently, Henry Ford was the first one in the States to come up with the 40-hour week.
Yeah, I
think he was. Yes,
increased wages and lower
because people were working 84 to 100 hours every week, working every day, and Ford was not responding to unions. There were no unions, and he knew that if the workers were happier and if they had some time off and if they were, they felt better.
If they were better paid.
They had spare time. They still get paid and they will buy products which they will use in their spare time and they'll drive around in Ford. So,
But that was a vision. It's a very funny quote from Herbert Hoover, who was the president in the late 20s, early 30s, and also gives his name to the Hoover Institution, that silly tower they have down at that community college in Palo Alto. We're creating happiness machines. People will work, they'll make money, and then they'll be able to buy products, and the corporations will make new products so that when they go back to work, then they'll get some more money and be able to buy these new things that will make them happy. And so this new vision of man as happiness machine came into existence. The funny thing is all these visions about the way in which mechanization and robotics were going to change the economy, a lot of them were extremely positive. Even really weird people like Herman Kahn, who's the inspiration for Dr. Strangelove, I should point out, he was saying that, in the future, and he was thinking at the year 2000 or at the very latest 2050, everyone in the world would be at a higher than present American standard of living, and that all of these machines and technological advancements would create a fabulous quality of life for all. And it's interesting. Now the way in which robotics was actually used, which was often to create unemployment so that you would have a surplus army of labor, so-called, right? You'd have lots of people who are unemployed, and that would hold down wages, and that would hold down demands for, increased quality of life or better working conditions.
Yeah, so we handed over more and more power over our lives to corporations, to the market, and the market said, well, wait a minute. We could give them a living wage and we could treat them well, but what if we did this instead? Like John Maynard Keynes, the famous Maynard Keynes, predicted that within 100, back in the 30s, he said by 2030 we'll be working 15-hour weeks because the automation will take everyone off the. We'll we won't have to do any meaningless work anymore. Everyone can devote themselves to the arts and the sciences and going to school. And
it was Marx's vision as well. We'll garden in the mornings and dance in the afternoons and play music at night. I mean, it was whatever Marx's formulation of it was. But there were really positive visions, and it didn't quite work out that way, did it? So now everybody is using all of their income as debt service, as little debt payments, as little rent payments, in order to maintain their lifestyle. But they're always right on the edge. And this can be true for people who have lots and lots of things and money, who have multiple houses, but they've got also multiple mortgage payments. And so even though they might make a lot of money, a huge amount of that money is going out, and they're constantly under they're under the threat. I mean, again, this is the other thing. If you can keep people in debt, you can keep people.
Yeah, there's never been higher levels of debt.
Sure. And so people are extremely afraid and extremely, in that sense, docile.
We'll keep them down. The New Economics Foundation, I printed out this incredible agenda for change that they have. It's like 90 pages. I've been reading it for 3 or 4 days. It's a UK think tank that has come up. We'll go through it a little later. There's several different subjects here that it talks about. How some organizations are changing to a new economic foundation, more localized and with different ideas like worker-controlled co-ops instead of just companies of municipality governments, of local governments, helping with housing and creating commons and all that stuff that goes completely against the market, because where's the profit in it? Well, it's not necessarily about profit, but they're also addressing again the standard. They want a standard 21-hour work week, which they say would address a number of problems: overwork, unemployment, overconsumption, high carbon emissions, low well-being, entrenched inequalities, and the lack of time to live sustainably, to care for each other, and simply to enjoy life. Which is doesn't make money for anybody. So why would workers have to enjoy life and have meaningful occupation?
Well, I mean, again, this is was a problem that the office of it was, I don't know if it even exists anymore. It was the Office of Employment Development or something like that. Employment Opportunity, I forget what they called it, in the early 70s. This is in the Nixon administration because, left and right in the political establishment in the United States, there was this big concern about what was going to happen because unemployment was coming, and they saw it coming, right? Europe was going to rebuild itself. Japan was going to rebuild itself. We rebuilt them, actually, in our image, and we weren't going to be able to employ all these people in the United States building things because Europe was going to do it for themselves. And so they came up with topics like, should there be some kind of universal basic income? Should the government pay everyone a minimal amount? Well, they came up with these pilots. They actually did them in New Jersey in the early 70s, and the person that was in charge of it was Donald Rumsfeld and his lieutenant, Dick Cheney. It was the first job he had in the Nixon administration. So, by the time,
Pretty extraordinary. Actually.
It's extraordinary. And the story, go look at Adam Curtis's blog. It's at the BBC. If you Google Adam Curtis and Anthony Fisher, you'll find it. This is how he describes it: a rollicking saga that involves all sorts of things not normally associated with think tanks, chickens, pirate radio, retired colonels, Jean-Paul Sartre, screaming Lord Such, and at its heart, a dramatic and brutal killing committed by one of the very men who helped to bring about the resurgence of the free market in Britain.
And he got away with it.
And there's this crisis that happens across the developed world in the 70s, which is the old idea of how the economy should work. And this was both center-right and center-left parties, so the Conservatives and Labour in the UK, and the Democrats and Republicans in the United States, to a lesser extent. This idea that the government is there to stand in between the interests of business and the people themselves and to broker some kind of deal. And that collapsed finally in the 90s with Clinton and Blair, who were convinced that the only way to get power was to mimic the right's economic policy. So Blair gives up power over the markets to the markets themselves. The government's no longer going to interfere. The government's no longer going to play that role. And that creates a temporary boom, and the stock market goes up, and middle-class people are very happy, and there's a sort of wealth effect. People's home values went up. But it creates this kind of bubble economy that bursts ultimately. And in the meantime, it's radically undermined in people's minds the ability of government to do anything about these kinds of problems. Because who gave up on that? It wasn't the right that gave up on the idea of the government doing anything about it. It was the left, right? Left so-called, right? It was the Democratic Party who were doing it under Clinton in the 90s. So, we're left in a world where there don't appear to be any kind of options. Slavoj Žižek has a funny line. He says, with all these movies about the end of the world and apocalypse, and whether it's an ecological disaster, whether it's Noah's Ark, whatever it is. He says everybody can imagine the world ending, but nobody can imagine capitalism changing a little bit. And I think he's right. Yeah. Because economics is religion, basically in our culture. It is nature, actually. It's better to put it that way. It's nature. Religion is, of course, business. If you're in the South, it's Christianity. If you're out here, it's Buddhism. But, that's just how you make money. But economics is synonymous in our minds with nature. That is just the way the world is, and it can't change. And there's a kind of vanity in thinking that it can change. And it's poo-pooed. I mean, we have to talk about utilitarianism as well at some point, because what it would say is that if I say, well, we ought to do something differently, that is merely my strategy to advance my own selfish interests. So it's a world in which altruism can't exist. It's a world in which ideas only exist in so much as they are attempting to accrue power to me and take it away from somebody else. It's a really narrow view of life, but I find it is really, really popular and ingrained, right? This is the way most people, even in a place like West Marin, where you'd think they would have more leisure to examine these things, even in a place like West Marin, people think this way. Anyway, 663-8492.
8492. 415-663-8492. Call in, won't you? We have, I'd like to give a little plug for CLAM, our local community land trust.
In the newspaper?
There is the annual meeting at the Dance Palace Yes, this Saturday, May 20th. 5 o'clock at the Dance Palace, serving clam chowder. And then the meeting is at 5:30. Wonderful organization started by Ray Levine, now carried on by Kim
Thompson.
And they, coming soon, a new clam home for sale. They recently purchased a single-family 3-bedroom home in Point Reyes Station and plan to sell the home at an affordable price later this year. The second home that Clam has been able to make available to a moderate-income family for purchase.
Yeah.
Clam will continue to own the land the home sits on, ensuring that the home will be resold affordably for generations to come. It's written into the sale contract that it has to remain affordable, whatever that will mean in 10 years from now.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I mean, something's got to give with how expensive it is to live.
See, here's the thing that really, I understand why big corporate employers, big employers, local employment, local companies, small business are still the biggest money makers. They contribute more to the economy than all these other corporations who are offshore now and multinationals. They don't pay any taxes. But this whole concept of keeping wages down so that and basically destroying the middle class by propping up the very system, the banking system that failed, all these other Ponzi schemes that happened, and the government steps in and gives them trillions of dollars, and they're still doing the same things. They're just repackaging things in different ways. But they're killing off the middle class, making the lower class, working class poorer. And yet, who is it that buys everything? It's the people. It's the people of the country that buy things. And when the wealth accrues to 1% of extremely wealthy men, mostly men, what is how can how do they even survive?
Well, I don't think it makes any sense. I mean, again, but and that's why I'd say it's ideological. I mean, it's like belief.
Right.
And the problem is it's kind of filtered down into the way we think about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so there are lots of people who write about the sort of neoliberal qualities of, say, Facebook. What it says is you have no fixed persona. You're just somebody who is trying to create images that the marketplace will respond to. And so the things that get liked, you do more of. The things that don't get liked, you do less of, etc. But that old idea that there was something in you that was a principle, like who do we honor in our history? I mean, who do we still talk about? The people like Gandhi, the obvious ones, right? People who had some principle that was fixed and they weren't going to change because it was unpopular. Well, we've created a condition now where people, certainly my age and younger, I was born in the 80s, don't feel that obtains in any way. And they're sort of right. They think that of course they have to respond to this marketplace, and of course they have to always be able to change themselves to keep up with it. What happens in that, though, is that we become sort of deeply unprincipled and uncentered as human beings. We become windsocks or weather vanes or whatever. Right. We're just blowing whatever direction the wind blows. And what means, things don't change, right? We reproduce the past, but we're not making any kind of forward progress. And that's also, people's self-conception as lonely individuals. That's how we think of ourselves.
Lonely individuals who are striving to stay afloat.
That's right. And I mean, and you can see how true it is.
And easy entertainment. You don't have much spare time, most of them, and so what do? You sit in the screen, and they're all your friends.
Yeah, the entertainments are not just they're easy; they're so complex and they're so engrossing. So I love this. I guess I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I'll do this. Yeah. So this is KWMR.
Let's talk economics. 663-8492.
KWMR Point Reyes Station. 415-663-8492. Do call in. Give us comments, thoughts, anything. Just greet us. Greet the day with a smile and call in and tell us what you think. And is there a future for this sort of localized change in governance and in economics in which small business is supported by community, and big businesses go on about doing their thing, and big government goes on about doing its thing, while we create little sustainable places of our own. Possible. Anyway, hang on.
Oh.
And KWMR Community Radio is supported by our listener members and the Bovine Bakery, located in Point Reyes Station, providing West Marin with pastries, coffee, soups, quiche, and pizza made from organic ingredients. Open 7 days a week. The Bovine Bakery, yes. A local business, there you go. And KWMR is also supported by the Pacific Sun, Marin's Arts and News Weekly, online at pacificsun.com. Anyway, this is Let's Talk. Charles Schultz, Paul Raffel, give us a call just to make contact.
That's at this point we'll set for.
We're sort of asking questions. Is it possible to have new economics? Is it possible to overcome this ridiculous system that we're operating under, where everyone feels disempowered, that they don't have they're disenfranchised in politics, they're scraping for money. Most of us are scraping for money, and
well, I think one, it's getting back to the idea of the lonely individual. I mean, it's a feeling which there is only loyalty to your job, right? There is no loyalty to people. There's only loyalty to institutions, and so I see people who are much more loyal to their career than they would to be any individual in their life. So you see how profoundly it undermines our ideals about love or family or this thing or that thing. You know, we're all just strategizing to get what we want, and that's reality. And it is just that stark and that bleak. So you better be loyal to your job. You better be loyal to your career or the institution you work for. And you better forget about this idea of some other qualities to life that would be more important. And to illustrate that, when John D. Rockefeller was 86, he penned the following words to sum up his life. He was such a fabulous poet as well as a man. I was early taught to work as well as play. My life has been one long happy holiday, full of work and full of play. I dropped the worry on the way, and God was good to me every day. And so this...
That's a lovely poem.
Oh, it's a terrifying poem.
It's like William Topaz McGonagall.
Well, the idea is that we're still living in Rockefeller's head, and the only two categories that are real are work and play. But where would you ever gotten a suffrage movement if the only two important things are work and play? Where would you ever gotten anything? So the problem is that the things that would drive changes in society essentially are squeezed out by this vision. And so I think play is an extremely conformist category. I think it's very dangerous. I encourage all of our listeners, do not play. Do not play this week.
Well, it was this lovely, glittery sort of ideal vision that was handed out after the Second World War, right, where the free market, all governments, Democrats, conservatives, Republicans, Labor, as they all became more center-oriented rather than helping workers, promising that the free market would give ordinary people control and take it away from big, powerful, overbearing institutions such as the state and the trade unions. Yes, overbearing. But the old promise of collective power as workers and citizens was to be replaced with individual power as consumers, entrepreneurs, and property owners, so that we could all become the authors of our own futures. Yeah. It's a lovely, glittery image that you get
to have a nice house.
And very well sold to everybody. I mean, they employ wonderful PR firms to do all this work for them.
Well, it says you get a nice house and attractive spouse. You just won't have any time to spend with either the house or the spouse, right? Except for your play, right? Except for the
and then we see monopolization of big business, of banks and food companies, everything else
more centralized. Yeah,
who really has control? Our economy, I'm quoting from the New Economics Foundation, this British think tank.
Briefly, 663-8492, please call.
Our economy has become one where wealth and power increasingly come not from producing useful products or services, but from controlling assets, money, land, natural resources, and now the raw material of the digital age, data. This is an economy where the average house makes more each year than the average worker.
In terms of its increase in value?
Yeah, and rents and,
Oh, right.
the rentier of the world.
Yeah, well, rentier capitalism back. If you can't make your little payments, your car payment, your insurance payments, that's the I in fire sector, by the way, insurance, for your phone or this or that, your life sort of falls apart. And think about how much people's lives they've invested in these little gadgets that they have to rent every month, right? I mean, I basically, well, for many reasons, I basically dropped out of my generation because I don't have a cell phone, I don't text. So much communication is through text now, and this is actually multi-generational now. Like 80-year-olds, I can't have a conversation with because they're too busy texting. I'm serious.
Speaking of which,
do we have any tweets?
Tweet us, won't you? I'm just firing this back up again.
So, I mean,
Let's Talk on KWMR.
So when Mark says, the workers have nothing to lose but their chains, well, now, supposing you can't make that cell phone payment every month, you lose your voice. You lose your ability to socialize. You lose the romantic dimension of your life, which is now so much dominated by interactions through these phones. And so I think people are pushed into a much more extreme position, which is very isolating. In fact, there are very few activities that we engage in that are about cooperation over our economic life or over what we need to survive, right? So we cooperate for play dates, right? I mean, we have parties. We have parties to raise money for parties. How do you like that? How do you like that? That's a great one.
I think it's great.
Well, of course you'd say that.
I
do have a picture of Paul Raffel wearing a T-shirt that says "Maybe partying will help." And though I'm inclined to agree with him, I would say you want this to be spontaneous partying, not planning for parties for planning for parties. See,
right.
It's too conformist.
And now, of course, we have the sharing economy, two words that should never go together, sharing and economy.
What does it mean? What does it mean, Paul?
And flexible working, which is the Uber model, right? Flexible working, except it's completely more and more inflexible. And if you turn down more than 3 passengers because, your kid's sick,
right,
then
you're fired? Is that how
Well,
that works?
you're shut out for a while at least. Anyway, they ignore the gross power imbalances between workers and employees. But there's a British company, Deliveroo. I guess it's like Uber but for deliveries.
I see.
Folks using their cars to deliver packages. And there's a recent strike. They have a union, and so they're striking. And politics taking control in our communities, community land trusts, and childcare, housing, and energy cooperatives. As this is your work that you're doing for the good of the world, the local power.
There are energy cooperatives in Western Mass all over the place, and talk to them, and it's a good idea. I think we shouldn't forget the role of traditional politics too. I mean, West Marin could begin today, and it might take a decade, but could begin today, step by step toward municipalization. I think it'd be a good idea for the long-term health of these places, in terms of or the long-term survival, even at this point, of a lot of these places. But that's a long-term program. It's not very sexy. It is very complex, and so what you find in our culture is that simplicity forces complexity out, and so whatever is easiest to understand somehow obtains whatever requires some effort to understand. Again, exhausted workers or people who just are so distractible or have so little time or don't read or whatever. So we're going to have to sort of dig our heels in at some point and take a different tack, and that's going to be difficult. It's going to require.
Well, it's going to have to happen in a short space of time if it's going to make any difference
if
now.
If you want to be someplace in 5 years,
especially with this government impact.
Yeah. Well, if you want to be someplace in 5 years, you've got to start now. So take the Marin Energy Authority. They were going to do all this stuff to localize the energy supply and blah blah blah. All the ideas that Paul Fenn, former Marshall resident, was putting out there. Say, we're going to do that. We're going to do that later, though. And the problem with this, we're going to do it later, is you never get there. You never start. Yeah. And so 7 years into this experiment with Marin Energy Authority, they're starting to get a little bit better on some issues. But, basically the old system where you made a monthly payment to PG&E and that went to Wall Street. Now is you make a monthly payment to Marin Clean Energy, which is a path-through to Shell, which goes to Wall Street. Right. So, I mean, that fundamental shift of trying to retain the wealth or the income that we have that we put in these little payments in local structures like cooperatives, what ultimately did not happen through Marin Clean Energy. It can happen, but it would require, again, people taking an activist position and saying, we're going to work for a long time and attend a lot of meetings to deal with this.
Which is what you've been doing for years.
And I would just say, again, neoliberalism essentially requires displacement, right? It was all about getting capital to move freely around the world. And that was not something that happened so easily in the past. But that was the course that we've taken over the last 40 years. So, there are all these complaints about how maybe Donald Trump got investment from Russians. But look, that's the economy we set up. It says Russians should be able to invest here and we should be able to take our money over there and blah, 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 blah. But moving money, it requires labor be displaced too. So the temp economy and just the way that we live, even many of these people are my friends. This is not a moral judgment, but even people who say oscillate between 2 or even 3 homes, they're never fully in their place. And actually political power comes from being in one place all the time for a long time. And in that sense is something really pernicious about how we feel that this is a really wonderful lifestyle if we can continually displace ourselves. What it means is that on the local level, not a lot of power accrues to the communities themselves.
It's always, again, yes, we have friends who are
they're great,
who are doing this, wonderful people. But I've always had this pet peeve about calling homes houses, using houses as investments. It's just especially with the Airbnb phenomenon, another sharing economy that's making lots of money for one guy.
Yeah, Marin County just did a deal with Airbnb in March.
And so, another idea is renters' unions, setting up something where this is in cities, I mean, it's not going to work out here, but a renters' union to push for change in rental governance, in regulations.
Renters' rights. I mean, in Marin, they have almost none. Surprise.
No, of course. Well, there was never a need for it. Right?
Yes, right. You don't want those people, Go live in Marin City if you want to do that. One of the problems is the home traditionally was this locus of productive activity, right? And not to get too far into this, but you can read the work of Jan de Vries, who's probably dead now. He's a professor at UC Berkeley for 90 million years. And he's saying that, the home was where people made all this stuff, not just stuff that they consumed, but stuff they also sold outside of the home. Yeah. But the home was a center for productive activity. Now, the home is a purpose in itself, right? The property is there, yes, to increase in value, but you don't do anything in that place. Maybe you go to sleep there, right? Maybe if you have time, you make dinner there.
One of my little snarky sayings that I love to say is nobody lives where they want to be, apparently. That's why we're full of visitors every weekend, because when you have spare time, you don't stay at home unless you're,
I think it reminds you of
put Roundup on your lawn and then...
it reminds people of how powerless they are over the work that they do. And if you get paid a lot of money to do work that you don't really like and you can have all these creature comforts, that's really persuasive to people. I don't know if it was I deliberately avoided that or that I was simply unemployable, but
probably that.
Yeah, well, you get
call
yourself
in if you'd like to offer Charles
employment.
a job.
Yes, exactly.
415-663-8492. Any comments are very, very, very welcome here. There's a lovely word here that the New Economic Foundation uses: a precariat. Mm-hmm. The precariat of people without the security of a regular wage or a pension.
It's that surplus labor. That's what holds down the wages for everybody. Is there always other people?
And we have a caller. Hi, caller. You're on the air. What's your name, please?
And watch my language too, or no?
Please watch your language. Yes.
Okay. This is David, and
David, sir.
I have not been able to hear your whole program. I'm sorry to say, because I've had people interrupting me in the store here.
Hate that, don't you?
Yes.
But I have 2 comments. One is, I love the 70s and the 80s, Charles, because I bought a house back then, and that's enabled me to stay here. I would have been gone a long time ago if I had not done that.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not criticizing anybody for taking advantage of the opportunity they had then. I'm just saying that it no longer exists.
I know that, and that's very sad. But the other thing, and I don't know if you've mentioned it on the program, but I think one of the big, what's the word for it, Charles? You'll be able to say it. What word am I looking for?
All you've given me is big.
One of the big bugaboos that the big failings of our society is that there are laws on the books that say that companies have to
create wealth.
Negotiate and navigate in the best interest of their stockholders. That's their first obligation.
Well, I can give you a grotesque example of that. So in the 80s, you had the takeover boom with the corporate raiders. People who remember that. Crown Zellerbach was a famous example in San Francisco. And by the end of the 80s, the biggest driver of buying up corporations and breaking them apart and selling off their assets, right, asset stripping so-called, were pension funds. And pension funds did this habitually because it was in the best interest of the beneficiaries of the fund, which they were by charter required to operate under. It meant that the pension funds themselves were the biggest driver for the destruction of American corporations and selling off their assets.
And paying jobs.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So it ensured that there would be no future pensioners, basically, in order to pay the other generation.
My head is on fire. That's horrible.
Yeah.
And corporations get sued by their stockholders for not acting in the stockholders' best interest, which is crazy.
Yeah,
sure. Well, this is what we were talking about earlier. After the war, there was this view, that because of what happened in the 30s. Laissez-faire capitalism, we're not going to go back there, and so there was even a great theory of it, which was Galbraith's theory, which was that the corporate management would be independent of the stockholders, and they would run the corporation in the interests of the workers, the community, the stockholders, everybody, but they would be this kind of dispassionate, third party who was managing everyone's interest. What the takeover boom showed was actually, no, the stockholders own the corporations, and they can tell the management what to do. And so, yeah, we ripped apart all of those corporations and institutions.
And now most stocks are held. There's like big four companies that control trading now.
Oh, sure. Yeah. The centralization is extraordinary.
The funds, mutual funds. There's big four mutual funds that control most of the stock in American companies.
Yeah, and like I say, people who bought stocks back in the
very powerful.
Yeah, people bought stocks back in the 70s and 80s and now living on dividend income in places like West Marin. How are they going to bite the hand that feeds them? What are they going to do about this? Right. So you have these kind of lies, and I think Paul Hawken's ethical capitalism is kind of a joke. And of course, he doesn't tell you who he invests in, right? He just says that if you invest with me, you'll be doing good rather than bad. Who are you investing in? Oh, well, can't tell you that.
Shovels.
Yeah, well, right. He didn't even make those. He imported those from England, incidentally, but very high quality.
David, yes, it's a confusing time. So we've been talking about all the different ways we could maybe begin to overcome this whole system with localization and local banking, creating local banks, credit unions, all those things, taking power out of the big banks and the big corporations.
Well, I still have my savings account here at Wells Fargo. But I do most of my banking through Petaluma, through Redwood.
Yep.
And I have basically a one-person business with one helper, and that's I like small business, and I'm fortunate to be able to have a skill that's marketable and that people are interested in.
And you're still enjoying?
On some days, yes, and it's been almost 50 years, so I'm a little tired of some parts of it.
But it's creative labor, creative work.
I'm lucky that I have that, really.
Well, we're looking at a big demographic problem, too, is that the older generations have all the money, and they're pretty pessimistic about the future for simple biological reasons, but also, I think, for the way in which the New Left collapsed in the early 70s, and then with what Ulrich Beck called the risk society, the result of 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, where actually technology is the enemy and the role of the state should be to protect us from it and blah, blah, blah. So they got really pessimistic really quick, but they got all the stuff. So every time I see Kirschman, I say, Kirschman, where's the check? Look, I mean, we could pass new local taxes out here. We could create tax assessment districts. We could municipalize, but I ain't doing it for free, Rich. So when I see you down at the station house, you bring that checkbook. So I mean, it's one of those things where, and what it does, unfortunately, I mean, it's extreme in a place like Westmoreland, is it means that the younger generation lives to please the older generation. I mean, whereas,
they should.
So they should, right? Well, the boomers, right, it was all about rejection. We're going to reject the our parents and our grandparents. And my generation is, how can we sell our parents and grandparents stuff? Hey, how can we give them the 70s back? And that's really sad.
I'm selling jewelry to a lot to the older people, people of my generation and a little younger, because the younger generation they're not interested in my kind of jewelry, and they're basically what they're being sold is a lot of really inexpensive, mass-produced Chinese.
Yeah.
Dreck.
Well, this is, I mean, again, style over substance, right? It just has to look a certain way, and it doesn't matter, how it's produced or where it's produced. And you find that all the time, and I can tell you, I even know of organic food businesses that use a lot of Chinese imports, and they're very expensive products, So it's all about, do you have the right brand? Do you have the right style? Do you have anything to say? Is there any substance? Well, that's not really important, does it does it look okay? So knowing the difference between a finely crafted piece of jewelry and simply having an object that represents fine craftsmanship in some way, well, what is the difference, right?
Well, that's what I should be making or importing, I guess.
Yeah, it
imitates my jewelry.
I think it's the idea of one I would say, and the younger generation just doesn't have the money for those kinds of things. I mean, a very small percentage of them would. But that's okay, because I think now we're actually asking these questions again. We stopped asking them after the sort of new left collapse of the late 60s and early 70s, and then it went like everybody went into siege mentality.
And everyone's, obviously, at least half of the country, and I would say most of us, are all looking for different ways now. And it's all come to a head with Brexit, with Trump, all that feeling of insecurity, of frustration, of disempowerment, of disenfranchisement, and here we are. We have the fruits of the free market system right now. I mean, it's like the logical conclusion.
Well, I would say
my friend Sandy Westrom, long gone. Her blessing was good luck to us all. And with that, I'm going to sign off because maybe there's somebody else who wants to call in.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, David.
Good to hear from you.
Well, no, I'd say that the obstacles created by this final recognition, or to use a Westmoreland-friendly term, this gestalt, that the way things have been going is no longer tenable, does unleash human creativity. It does have the potential, anyway, to allow us to start thinking about creative solutions to our problems. And so I am hopeful because I think people are thinking about it, which is very new, because mostly, again, if you see everything in terms of your own individual experience, as long as in your own mind things are okay for you, or maybe for you and your family, which is the sort of Thatcher formulation, there is no society, just individuals and their families, then you could explain away all the other stuff, which is really easy.
Well, so really the time is now when the rugged individualism that created this place, this community out here, right, the ranchers and all of that, but and the people who came here in the 60s and 70s, the kind of vanguard of the old hippies moving out of the city and coming here, that individualism is no longer necessarily a valid thing, that we have to start operating more cooperatively with everyone else. I see that happening here. Yeah. I mean, there are lovely institutions here, and things like the Dance Palace, which was created by the community. They put their funds together and built this great place.
Great illustration.
KWMR is another great example of it.
My friend Mark in Tamales, he said, Charles, when we do all these things, we did them back in the 70s when we were your age, and now we all just walk around and contemplate death. There was a lot of activity here around the back of the Landers. Again, I mean, they're coming out of here in a sense of disappointment, not triumph. It was to run away from something, and unfortunately, what the generation that followed them. Mine inherited from them was a deep pessimism about politics. And that's really unfortunate because, again, staying in one place is how power accrues to you, if you can. And then organizing with other people is the way in which, the weak can negotiate with the powerful. And,
so setting up having local knowledge, having local binding bonds with everyone around you, you're more inclined, you know who is going to be efficient doing certain things, certain tasks. You can share tasks better because you know everyone so well. The day of the individual in this country, especially even in the West.
West, people still think of them that way. But without having any real reality, they still think of themselves as individuals. And what I would say is that it takes years to get to know people. And what I see is a culture, and I know Amanda's going to come up here and hit me, and I see people that slap the word friend or the word community on what we call the certain activities we engage in. Actually, she's just walked in the door. I am really in trouble. I think we're cheating ourselves.
Put the back down.
And we can do better. And actually, we can reclaim community and we can reclaim friendship. We can do those things. Takes effort, and it takes self-examination.
This is a whole different subject. What about because we are less powerful as a community voice out here because we are not incorporated? Is that a necessary step, incorporation, before we can actually set this stuff in motion? Although, CLAM exists, this station exists,
what I would say,
all these community institutions exist out here.
Well, as I've said many times, I asked people to fund it, and nobody's ever said yes. Could be. I'm not a credible salesman or representative of the idea, but you would start with, I think, a sales tax would be the easiest thing to do, and you would give these organizations out here real budgets, which means more for CLAM, but you would take your village association and you would actually put them in charge of managing money, and you would see how the seriousness of the conversations and the activities of those groups would develop when they're actually managing this revenue that's coming in. And then, subsequent to that, you could start a conversation about municipalization. Because when you would go to LAFCO and you would say, hey, look, we're managing budgets. We're dealing with the affairs of our particular place. We want the powers that come with being a municipality. Problem is, that would take years. It would take a long time, and I've yet to meet the people that have that level. Level of commitment. But hopefully somebody will pick it up.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for listening. And thank you, David, for calling in. This has been Let's Talk. We want to thank all our listeners today, wherever you are. And KWMR does not take a stand on any of the issues discussed on Let's Talk. Opinions expressed on this program are those of the hosts and callers and don't necessarily reflect the views of KWMR, its board of directors, underwriters, or members. We're on every Thursday from 11 till noon, and next week we'll have another fascinating subject. And call in. Listen in. Thank you, everybody.